We know that perspective adds depth to our drawings, but perspective alone isn't enough to make a drawing look realistic. The trick is often in effectively shading light and shadow. Understanding how light interacts with form is a big deal if you want to start shading. I would argue that proper shading has an even bigger impact on depth and realism than perspective. Sorry, Marshall. I've seen many students struggle with this. They draw beautiful outlines, but then completely flatten their forms with incorrect shading. Let's not do that anymore. Let's learn how to shade. The key to throwing shade is knowing your target's insecurities and hitting them with surgical precision. You need to observe their weaknesses, understand their vulnerabilities, and then deliver a perfectly timed comment that leaves them questioning their life choices. What's up, nerd? Planes. When light hits an object, it reveals the object's planes. Imagine them as small, flat tiles spread across the surface. The planes facing the light will be lighter than the planes facing away. Adding another plane between these introduces a new intermediate value. So when we shade, every value change that we make on a form suggests a plane change. We're gonna draw balls, and balls are smooth. Well, at least this one is. This ball is smooth. But even on smooth forms, thinking of them as composed of many smaller planes helps you imagine how the form turns. Planes facing the light are part of the light family, and planes facing away are part of the shadow family. When we shade, we need to clearly communicate which parts of the object are in light and which are in shadow. This simple organization of values into two families does the most in communicating form. It's not everything, but it's definitely the place to start. If you want to level up your shading, go check out the full course at proko.com/drawing. We go deeper into the fundamentals and even have guest instructors like Steve Houston. Parts of light and shadow. Let's start simple. A sphere on a surface with one light source. Light on form is typically broken down into distinct zones. You'll see the divisions more clearly on simple forms with simple lighting. But once you get it, you can apply it to anything. Before we get into the details, let's quickly introduce the elements of light on form. First, there's the terminator.
Hasta la vista.
No distractions, let's keep going. The terminator is the edge where light transitions into shadow. Beyond it is the form shadow, the area that's turned away from the light source. It's different from the cast shadow, which occurs when an object blocks light from hitting another surface. On the lit side, we have the center light, that's the point facing directly toward the light source. As the form turns away from the center light, we see darker and darker halftones, until they reach the terminator.
Baby.
And then it becomes shadow. Highlights are reflections of the light source itself, so you won't see them on matte materials. Within the shadows, reflected light, that's light bouncing around the environment, bounces into the shadow and gently lightens some of it. The darkest part of a form shadow is usually along the terminator.
I'll be back.
No, please don't come back. The darkest part along the terminator is called the core shadow. And finally, occlusion shadows. You'll see them in tight crevices where objects touch. Occlusion shadows are commonly the darkest values. They're like the highlights of the shadow family. The value structure. You already know how to think in terms of limited value groups like light, medium, and dark. Let's use that to group the elements we just learned into value zones with hard edges. No blending or gradations, let's just observe the values. Separate the light and shadow by blocking in your entire shadow area with a darker value, representing the reflected light. You're saying, this is the lightest that the shadow can get. In the light family, I like to think of 3 values. If the form you're drawing is very matte, without a clear highlight, then I'll use 3 values for the halftones. The lightest halftone zone is the biggest, and the dark halftone is the smallest. If the form does have a highlight, Then I'll simplify the halftones to just dark halftone and light halftone. I'll use that third value, the brightest value, for a clear highlight shape. In the shadow family, within the form shadow, I like to think of just two values. The value we put down originally to define the shadow is the reflected light. It's the lightest part of the shadow. So let's add a darker value for the core shadow. We can give the occlusion shadow the same value as the core, and we would have a total of 5 values. And this is my favorite way to map out the values. We have 3 in the lights and 2 in the shadows, favoring more detail and complexity in the lights. In reality though, the occlusion shadow is usually even darker than the core shadow. And sometimes, depending on the environment and how much light bounces back into the cast shadow, the rest of the cast shadow might be darker too, closer to the value of the core shadow. And as cast shadows go farther away from the object, the edges get softer. So if you want to get really technical, you can use some of the values from the light family to transition the cast shadow into the light around those blurry edges. So shading form isn't as simple as smudging gradations across our shapes, unfortunately. It's never a linear gradation from light to shadow. Instead, we bounce around a bit. Some steps are subtle, others are more dramatic. The transitions within the lighter halftones are very subtle, while the jump from halftone to core shadow is usually quicker and more obvious. And after the core shadow, we get lighter again because of the reflected lights, and then darker for the occlusion, and lighter again as the occlusion transitions to the cast shadow. Of course, this is just a simplified example to help you understand the relationships. This pattern and these values I used here are not a hard rule. The exact value steps will vary based on the object and the light source, but this is a good starting point to get familiar with a common pattern you'll see. What matters most is maintaining the correct relationship between these values. As you practice, you'll develop an intuition for how light describes form, and you'll be more comfortable with all the subtle shifts in value that create realistic depth. You'll start to feel when a value or transition is wrong. Light and shadow are tools to create the illusion of 3 dimensions on a flat surface. Master these tools, and your drawings won't look flat. This is just a sample of the premium course. In Drawing Basics, I'll go over all of this in more detail with several demos. We already have over 150 lessons just in this one course so far, covering everything you need to know about the fundamentals. So go check that out at proko.com/drawing. See you there.